All right, everyone. So today's video is going to be about finding a percent of a number. So we're going to dig into what that means. All right, so let's learn how to find the percent of a number. So that's our goal. So hopefully by the end of this lesson today, you'll be able to accurately find the percent of something. So let's review what we learned about yesterday. So yesterday we learned about what is a percent. We learned that a percent means per 100 or out of 100. We learned that a percent is a fraction with a denominator of 100. We also learned that a percent can be shown as a decimal and that we know that percents, fractions, and decimals all represent the same amount, just in different forms. So if I want to show 65% as a decimal, it'll be 65 hundredths or 0.65. And if I want to show 65% as a fraction, it would be 65 over 100. So now let's kind of get into this idea of finding a percent of something, because percents can be used to find parts and pieces of other things. And so that's mainly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be looking at a total and then finding a percent or a part or a piece of that total. So let's use a test. So you guys are all familiar with tests, right? So suppose you took a math test and that test had 100 questions on it. What does each grade mean? So let's say you are a student and you got a 0%. Well, that actually means you got 0 questions correct. So 0% means none. But let's say you got a 100%. Well, 100% means that you got all 100 questions correct. Well, let's say you got a 50%. Well, that means that you actually got 50 out of the 100 questions correct. And we know the relationship between 50 and 100 is that 50 is half of 100. So 50% means we're looking for half. And the last one is, what if you got a 25%? Well, that means you got 25 questions correct out of 100. And 25, the relationship between 25 and 100 is 25 is a fourth or a quarter. And so it would be basically, if we took the test and broke it into 4 equal parts, you would just have gotten 1/4 or one little part of that correct. So that means you got 25 questions. So let's say you took a different test. Let's say this time this test only had 50 questions on it. What does each grade mean? Well, if you got a 0%, it still means you got 0 questions correct. If you got a 100%, it means you got all 50 questions correct. If you got a 50%, that means you got half, which means you got 25 questions correct. And if you got a 25%, that means you got a quarter. So that means you only got 12 and a half questions correct. So the pattern I want you guys to start picking up on is, what do these percentages mean? What does 0% mean in each situation? So in the last situation, 0% meant 0 questions. And then even in this situation, even though it's a different test, 0% still means 0. In the last example, 100% meant you got all the questions correct. And in this example, even though the test is different, it still means you got all the questions correct. 50% in the last example meant you got half of the questions correct, and it still means half in this. And so 25% meant a fourth in the first example, and it still means a fourth or a quarter in this example. So I want you to pick up on this pattern of what these percentages mean. So let's say you took a test and this test had 20 questions. It only had 20 questions on it. What does each grade mean? Well, as you guessed it, 0% still means 0. So anytime you're looking for 0% of something, you're basically saying 0, none. 0% always means 0. Then what about the person who got a 100%? They got all 20 questions correct. So 100% means everything, all of it. And then someone who got a 50% would be half, so that if there are 20 questions on the test, that means that this person got 10 questions correct. And then the last one, 25%, means a fourth or a quarter. And so if there are 20 questions, well, then a fourth of 20 is 5. So in each of these situations, these percentages represented a portion or a piece of the test. 0% means none. 100% means you got all of it, but 50% means you only have half a piece. And then 25% means you have an even smaller piece. And so the closer you get to 100, the closer you're getting to all. And the closer you get to 0, the closer you're getting to none. And so if I take a test and I got a 90%, then that means I got almost all the questions correct. But if I take a test and I only got a 10%, that means I only got a small piece of the questions correct. And so percentages are a portion or a part or a piece. And what we're going to learn in the next example is how to figure out how big that piece is in different situations. So what does 0% mean? It means, and let's write this down, and this is not on the slide, so you're going to want to go ahead and write this down in your packet that's sitting in front of you. Hopefully you're going through the packet with me. So what does 0% mean? It means none or 0. So 0% means you have none. You have 0. 100 means that you have all of something. And it depends on what that something is to know what all is. So when there was 50 questions on the test, then a 100% meant all 50. When there were 20 questions on the test, then 100% meant all 20. If I told you that I had 25 pieces of candy and you wanted 100% of my candy, that means you want all of my candy. If someone tells you you need to give me 100% effort out there on the football field, then that means they want you to put all of your effort into that game or into that practice. So 100% means all. 50% means half. Anytime you see 50%, know that they are talking about half, period. So if you are at a store and they say everything in the store is 50% off, then that means whatever price tag or whatever price is on the price tag, you get to take it and cut it in half. If I tell you that you can get 50% of my sandwich, that means I'm going to take my sandwich and cut it in half, and I'm going to give half of it to you. 25% means 1/4. 1/4. And so that means if I were to take something and break it into 4 equal sized pieces, you would get one of those equal sized pieces. So 25% always means a fourth. And remember, the closer you get to 100%, the bigger the piece is. The closer you get to 0, the smaller the piece is. So let's look at this. It says, is 80% a small piece, half a piece, or a large piece of the whole? So if I had a sandwich and I say you can get 80% of my sandwich, am I offering you a little piece of my sandwich, half of my sandwich, or a large piece of my sandwich? What am I offering you? And so we want to think about, well, is 80% closer to 100, closer to 50, or closer to 0? And so it's actually closer to 100. So we would say that this would be a large piece of the whole because it's closer to 100%. The next one says, is 15% a small piece, half a piece, or a large piece of the whole? So if I told you that you can get 15% of my sandwich, am I offering you just a small piece of my sandwich? Am I offering you half of my sandwich? Or am I offering you a large piece? And so we got to be thinking about, am I closer to 0, which is none, or am I closer to 100, which is the whole sandwich? Well, 15% is closer to 0, which means it would be a small piece because it's closer to 0%. So remember, a percentage is a portion, a part, a piece of something. And we're either going to get a big piece of it, half of it, or a small piece. And we're looking to see how close we are to 0. If we're around 50, that would be half. Or if we're getting closer to 100, that means we're getting a pretty big chunk or a pretty big piece. So there are some steps for finding a percent. So let's say I want to find what is 80% of 40 pieces of candy. So I have 40 pieces of candy and I'm saying to you, you can get 80% of the candy in my bag. How many pieces is that? Does that mean 80 pieces? Well, no, you only got 40 pieces of candy. So the question is, if it's 80%, that means I'm getting a portion of the candy, but not all of it. The only way I would give you all of my candy is if I said I'm giving you 100% of the candy in my bag. And then that means I'm handing all 40 pieces to you. But because I'm giving you 80%, that means I'm going to give you a chunk of it, but some of it I'm going to keep. So the question is, well, what's 80%? How many pieces of candy am I going to give you? So the process is, the first step is you want to locate in the problem what is the percentage. And the way you locate a percentage is by the percent sign. And the percent sign is this nice little symbol right here. So once you see that symbol, know that you are dealing with a percentage. So this is 80%. So that's my percentage. Then you want to locate in the problem, what is the whole or the total amount? So the total amount is 40. There's 40 pieces of candy in my bag. And so now my third step is I'm going to take that percent and change it to a decimal. And we learned in our video yesterday, we'll put the decimal at the end of the number and go 2 hops away from the percent sign. And that's how I end up with 0.80. Now, my last step is to take that decimal, 0.80, and multiply it by the whole or the total. So because my total was 40, I'm going to multiply 40 times 0.80, and that's going to give me 32. So that means 32 is 80% of 40. So if I'm giving you 80% of the candy in my bag, I'm going to give you 32 pieces of my candy. And think about it. Is 80% closer to 100 or is it closer to 0? If it's closer to 100, that means I'm giving you almost all of it or a pretty big piece of it. If it's closer to 0, then I'm getting closer to none of my candy. So 80% is a pretty big piece. It's pretty close to 100. So it makes sense that I'm giving you a lot of the candy in my bag. I'm giving you 32 pieces out of my 40. So most of the candy I'm giving to you. So let's do this one together. And then I'm going to have you do some ones on your own. We'll do it like we've been doing. I'll have you pause the video. You'll work on it. Then we'll start the video again. I'll go over it and you can be checking along as you go to see how you're doing. All right, so this one, we'll do 2 together. So we'll do 2 together and then it'll be on you. All right, so we want to know, what is 20% of 140 shirts? So if I have 140 shirts, I want to know what's 20% of those shirts. So the first step is to locate in the problem, what is the percentage? So remember, we're looking for the percent sign, and I see that here. So my percentage is 20%. And let's think about that. Is 20% closer to 0 or 100? Well, it's closer to 0, so that means it's not going to be a big piece. It's going to be a smaller piece. So then next we want to locate what is the whole or the total amount. So the total amount that I have 140 shirts. And so my total or my whole is 140. My next step is to change the percent to a decimal. So 20%, I want to change to a decimal. So I'm going to put that decimal here, hop 2 places. And so that gives me 0.20. And then my last step is to take my decimal, 0.20, multiply it by the whole or the total, 140. So I'm going to do that in my calculator. So 0.20 times 140, and it gives me 28. So if I want 20% of the shirts, I am asking for 28 of the shirts in your closet. I'm asking for 28. And that makes sense. If I got a ton of shirts, 140, if I want 20%, I'm not going to take a big chunk because 20% is closer to 0. So it makes sense that I'm only getting a few of the shirts compared to how many you have. So 28 is 20% of 140. All right, let's do another one. What is 6% of 300 computers? So my first step is to locate in the problem what the percentage is. So I'm looking for the percent sign. I see it here. So this is my percentage. So I'm only looking for 6%. And that's a pretty small piece because I'm close to 0. So that's a really small piece. So I shouldn't end up with 295 as my final answer, because that don't make sense, because I'm getting a small piece. And I shouldn't end up with something bigger than 300 because there's only 300. So if I'm only getting 6%, that means I'm only getting a portion, a part, a piece. So that means I can't end up with a number bigger than 300. So my next step is to locate what is the total or the whole. Well, what do I have? I have 300 computers. That's my total. So now I want to figure out what is 6% of 300. So my first step is to change the percent to a decimal. So again, I'm going to change that to a decimal. I'm going to put that decimal at the end of the number and hop 1, 2 places. And remember, where there's an empty hop, I add a 0. So this is 0.06. And notice I like to put a 0 in front of that decimal here as a placeholder. It's just a placeholder. So if you had 0.06 and you didn't put that 0 in front, your answer is still the same as mine. So now my next step is to multiply the whole 300 by the decimal. So I'm going to take 0.06 and multiply it by 300. I'm going to do that in my calculator and see what I get. And that gives me 18. So that would be 18 computers. So does that make sense? If 300 is the total, that's a lot of computers. I'm only taking 6%. That's a small piece because remember, we're pretty close to 0. So it makes sense that I get a small number, that I get 18. That means I'm not getting most of the computers. Most of the computers you keeping. I'm only taking 6%, so I'm only getting a few of them. All right. So I want you to try this one. You can work at your table groups if your teacher is okay with that, but I want you to solve this one and then we'll come back together. So pause the video here and solve this one. Make sure you follow the steps and look back at what we did on the last two. All right, so hopefully you had time to work on that problem. So let's do it together so you can check your work. So you need to save $30 for a new video game. So far, you saved 70% of what you need. How much money have you saved? So you need $30 to get the video game that you want. You're saving money. You've already saved 70% of the money that you need. So 100% would mean that you have all $30. You don't have all $30 yet, but you got 70%. The question is, how much money is that? So we want to first locate our percent. We got 70%. Then what is the whole or the total? I need $30. I'm going to change the percent to a decimal. So 70%, I'm going to change to a decimal, doing the same steps I've been doing. So that would give me 0.70. And then I'm going to multiply 0.70 times 30. And 0.70 times 30 gives me 21. So far, I have saved $21. So I'm close. I'm getting up there. And think about it, 70% is close to 100. So I've almost saved all the money I need, just not quite. All right, here's your next one. Pause the video, try this problem, and then we'll come back together. All right, so hopefully you and your teammates were able to work on this problem. So the school band has 60 members in it. In the band, 15% of the members play the trumpet. How many band members play the trumpet? So we know not everybody in the band is going to play the trumpet. That wouldn't really be a band. So, but there's a part of the band that is the trumpet. It's a portion, a piece, and 15% isn't a big chunk. 15% is closer to 0, so we're expecting a smaller answer compared to 60. So let's see. First, let's locate the percentage. We've got 15%. I'm looking for that percent sign, y'all. That's your clue. That's how you know you got the percentage. Then I'm going to locate my whole or my total. I know it's a total of 60 members. Now I'm going to change the percent to a decimal. Put that decimal on the end and hop. 1, 2 spots. And that gives me 0.15. And so now I'm going to take 0.15 and multiply it by my total, 60. I'll do that in my calculator. And that gives me 9. So in this band, we have 9 trumpet players. 9 people play the trumpet. And if we think about 60 people total, it makes sense that only about 9, a small piece, a small portion, play the trumpet. All right, next. All right, try this one, and then we'll come back together again and go back over it. All right, so hopefully you had a chance to do that. So let's check it out. Let's see how you did. A store is offering a coupon for 5% off a purchase. If you buy a shirt for $35, how much money will you save? Okay, you got a coupon. Coupons make you save money. I like me a coupon. All right, so first we're going to locate what is the percentage. The percentage is 5%. So your coupon is for 5% off. You want to locate the total or the whole. My shirt is $35. That's the total amount of the shirt. Now we're going to change the percent, 5%, to a decimal. Put that decimal on the end and move 2 spots away from the percent sign. 1, 2. Wherever you have an empty hop, put a 0. So my answer as a decimal is 0.05. Be very careful. It's not 0.5. It's 0.05. Now I want to multiply my decimal times my whole. So I'm going to put 0.05 times 35 in my calculator, and that gets me 1.75. So when we're talking about money, that's $1.75. So I am going to save $1.75. That's not what I'm paying for this shirt. They just said how much money am I going to save? So that's what they're going to take off of my total. They're going to take my total $35 and take $1.75 off. So I get to save that money. All right, so now we have our exit ticket. You need to do this one completely on your own just to see. So if you've been working with your table group, that's fine. I want you to do this one completely on your own to see what do you know by yourself, and then we'll come back together. All right, so let's check how you did. So Olivia sells Girl Scout cookies. She wants to sell $360 by the end of the cookie season. So far, she has reached 25% of her goal. How much money has she made so far? So she's selling cookies. She's got a goal for $360. She's done 25% of that. What does that mean? So let's check it out. So step 1, I'm looking for my percent, and I've got 25%. Step 2, I look for my total. My total is 360. My next step is to take that percent, change it to a decimal. So put that here, boom, boom, move it 2 spots. So that gives me 0.25. And then I'm going to multiply that by my total. So I'm going to do 0.25 times 360, and that gives me $90. So she has raised $90. So if you got $90 as your answer, then that means you have come a long way, and now you can find the percent of a number. So now your next step is going to be you'll have another worksheet, and they'll just give you more opportunities to practice this. Use your steps. So if you need to, keep your packet in front of you with the steps out and just follow those steps until you don't need them anymore. That's all for today.